I'm Commander Evelyn Swan, 38 years old. I grew up in a small Colorado town where the sky felt wider than the life I was supposed to live, and I turned that restlessness into a 20-year career that took me from cadet to commanding officer. For years, I gave everything to the service, loyalty, time, and every personal milestone I never stopped to have. But when a young recruiter looked me up and down in jeans and a t-shirt and said, "We don't need secretaries," I made a choice that changed more than one career, including his. Have you ever been written off by someone who had no idea who they were talking to? Dismissed before you even had a chance to speak? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before I tell you what happened that day, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground and remind someone who you are, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about earning respect and setting boundaries. What happened next surprised everyone in that room, including me. I stood in the recruitment office wearing jeans and a t-shirt, my hair down, no makeup, looking like any other civilian who'd wandered in off the street. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that particular shade of institutional white that made everything look washed out and tired. 3 recruits sat in plastic chairs along the wall, filling out paperwork. A teenager in a hoodie glanced up at me, then back down at his phone. Behind the desk, Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole barely looked up from his computer screen. I grew up in a small Colorado town where the sky stretched wider than any dream I thought I was allowed to have. My mother worked 2 jobs, morning shift at the diner, evening shift cleaning offices downtown. She'd come home smelling like coffee and bleach, her hands raw, her back bent, but she never complained. Not once. She just looked at me over our microwave dinners and said, "You're going to do better than this." I spent my weekends at the local airfield, a dusty strip of tarmac where volunteers restored old aircraft. I'd hand them tools, fetch parts, listen to their stories about flying. They talked about freedom, about seeing the world from above, about purpose. I was 14 when I knew I wanted to wear the uniform. Not because I was running from something, but because I was running toward it. ROTC in college felt like finally speaking a language I'd been trying to learn my whole life. I learned to march, to lead, to push past the point where my body wanted to quit. I earned my commission at 22 as a second lieutenant, 01, standing in that borrowed dress uniform with my mother in the front row, crying into a tissue. She'd never cried at anything else, not when the rent was late, not when the car broke down, not when my father left. But she cried that day. Colonel David Rains found me 6 months into my first posting. I was struggling with a logistics problem, trying to coordinate transport for equipment that should have been straightforward, but had turned into a bureaucratic nightmare. He walked into my office without knocking, read the board where I'd mapped out the problem, and said, "You're thinking about this wrong." He didn't tell me the answer. He asked me questions until I found it myself. That became our pattern. He pushed harder than anyone else, expected more, accepted less. Where other superiors smiled and nodded and told me I was doing fine, he'd look at my work and say, again, "Better." He became the voice in my head during every decision, every challenge. Not harsh, just honest. The kind of honest that built something instead of tearing it down. I gave everything to the service. While my college friends got married, had babies, bought houses with backyards, I deployed. Again and again. I took command of underfunded units that nobody else wanted, the ones with broken equipment and morale problems and retention rates that made headquarters nervous. I'd arrive, assess, rebuild. It took months each time, sometimes years. I missed weddings, funerals, birthdays. I missed my mother's 60th because I was in Germany. I missed the funeral of my best friend from high school because I was in Qatar. The uniform became my identity. Not in a hollow way, but in the way water becomes part of a riverbed. Inseparable. Necessary. When people asked what I did, I didn't say I worked in the Air Force. I said I was Air Force. Past tense felt impossible. But the system had its own language for women like me. "You're good for morale," a superior once told me after I'd spent 6 months turning around a failing maintenance unit. Not good at logistics or effective at leadership. Good for morale. Like I was a poster on the wall instead of the person running the operation. Another time, during a promotion board, I overheard through a conference room door. She's qualified, but she's also convenient. Looks good in the metrics. I never responded to those moments. I kept my face neutral, my voice professional, my work impeccable. Colonel Rains had told me early on, they'll look for reasons to doubt you. Don't give them any. So I didn't. I documented everything, exceeded every standard, volunteered for the assignments nobody wanted. I thought if I was just good enough, consistent enough, professional enough, the doubt would disappear. It never did. It just got quieter. By the time I made 05, Lieutenant Colonel, I'd deployed 4 times, commanded 3 units, and earned enough commendations to wallpaper a small room. I was 38 years old. My mother had stopped asking when I'd settled down, have a family. She'd started asking when I'd come home for more than a weekend. I didn't have an answer for that. The base housing unit I lived in was temporary. Everything in it was temporary. Furniture from the PX, dishes from the commissary, photos in frames I could pack in 20 minutes. I'd lived this way for 16 years. Moving every 2 or 3 years, starting over, learning new faces and new protocols and new problems that were always variations of the same problems. I loved it. That was the part one couldn't explain to civilians. The instability, the constant assessment, the weight of responsibility, it felt like the only place I fit. Colonel Rains once said, some people need roots. You need wings. He was right. But even wings get tired. The policy shift came down from the Pentagon without warning. Younger officers, many with political connections and advanced degrees, but limited field experience, were being fast-tracked into leadership positions. Seasoned officers like Rains found themselves shuffled sideways or pushed into early retirement. The new faces at command briefings were confident, articulate, and had never spent a night in a tent or dealt with a supply shortage that could ground an entire squadron. At a conference in Washington, I sat in a hotel bar with 3 other lieutenant colonels, all of us with comparable records. A captain 03, maybe 28 years old, walked past our table, glanced at my uniform, and said to his companion, loud enough for us to hear, token female CO. They've got to have at least one for the optics. The others at my table went quiet. One started to stand. I put my hand on his arm and shook my head. We finished our drinks. I went back to my room. I didn't sleep well that night, but I slept. The next morning, I volunteered to review Air Force recruitment procedures. It wasn't glamorous work, and nobody wanted it. That made it perfect. I wanted to see how we were bringing people into the service, how we were assessing them, what biases might be hiding in the initial contact. I'd heard stories about recruiters misjudging candidates based on appearance, dismissing qualified applicants because they didn't fit some imagined profile of military potential. Colonel Rains called me after he heard about my new assignment. Why recruitment? He asked. You could be positioning for battalion command. Because it matters who we let through the door, I said. And I want to see what the door looks like from the other side. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the uniform doesn't make you equal in everyone's eyes. Keep your composure. Your record will do the talking. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. I'd been visiting recruitment offices across 3 states, mostly in uniform, always announced. Professional courtesy. The offices cleaned up before I arrived. The recruiters stood at attention. Everyone said the right things. I learned nothing useful. So I changed my approach. I walked into that office in Colorado Springs on a Tuesday afternoon wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a plain t-shirt, sneakers. My hair was down. No makeup. I looked like someone's girlfriend or maybe a young mother running errands between shifts. I'd driven 2 hours to get there, specifically because nobody at this office knew my face. The waiting area smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. Government-issued chairs lined the walls, the kind that were manufactured to be uncomfortable enough that you didn't want to stay but not so uncomfortable you could complain. 3 recruits were scattered around the room, the teenager in the hoodie I mentioned, a young woman with a college backpack covered in pins, and a man in his mid-20s wearing work boots and a flannel shirt. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole sat behind the desk like he owned it. He was maybe 25, with the kind of confidence that comes from being told you're good at something before you've actually been tested by it. E5, Probably made rank at 23 or 24, stationed here for what I'd guess was his first recruiting assignment. His uniform was crisp, his desk organized, his posture exactly what the manual recommended. Everything looked right. I approached the desk and waited. He finished typing something, then glanced up at me for maybe half a second before returning to his screen. "Help you?" "I'm interested in joining," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He didn't look up again. "We're pretty full right now. What's your background?" "I've got some experience." That made him pause. He looked at me again, this time for a full 2 seconds, assessing. I could see him cataloging civilian clothes, no obvious physical training, probably mid-30s, definitely too old for most positions. His expression shifted into something between polite and dismissive. "Experience in what?" he asked. "Operations. Leadership. Some technical work." He smiled. Not unkindly, but like someone explaining something obvious to a child. "Ma'am, I appreciate your interest, but we've got specific needs right now. Combat roles, technical specialties, cyber operations." "What you're describing sounds more suited to," he paused, searching for the diplomatic phrase. "Administrative support. Civilian HR, maybe. The Air Force has contractor positions that might be a better fit." The young woman with the backpack glanced over at me, then away. The teenager smirked into his phone. The man in the flannel shirt kept his eyes on his paperwork, but his shoulders tensed like he was embarrassed on my behalf. "I'm not interested in contractor work," I said. Cole leaned back in his chair. "Look, I'm being straight with you. You seem nice, but the Air Force is looking for a specific type right now. Younger, physically fit, ready for the demands of military life. Administrative positions are civilian-run these days. We don't really need," he stopped himself, recalibrated. "We're not hiring for those roles through military recruitment." "Secretaries," I said. He blinked. "I didn't say that." "You were about to." The room got quieter. The teenager stopped pretending to look at his phone. Cole's smile tightened, professional veneer still intact, but starting to show cracks. "Ma'am, I'm trying to help you here. Save you some time. We have very specific requirements for enlistment, and, honestly, at your age, even if you were qualified, the physical standards alone, what if I told you I'm already in the system?" I asked. That stopped him. He glanced at his screen, then back at me, skeptical but now slightly uncertain. "Your prior service?" "Something like that." He typed something, waited for a screen to load. "Name?" "Before you search, I'm curious. What made you assume I wasn't qualified?" His jaw tightened. The professional mask slipped just enough to show irritation underneath. "I didn't assume anything. I'm making an assessment based on obvious factors. No disrespect, but you don't exactly walk in here projecting military bearing." The college student with the backpack was watching openly now. Cole noticed and seemed to feel the need to defend his position, to prove his judgment to the room. "Look," he said, louder now, making sure his words carried, "we get people in here all the time who think they want to serve, but don't understand what it actually takes. I'm doing my job, which is to identify candidates who have what the Air Force needs. And right now, ma'am, with all due respect, we don't need secretaries." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that happens right before something breaks. I reached into my bag slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my ID. Not my driver's license or a credit card. The ID I carried was matte black, slightly thicker than standard issue, with an embedded security chip that glowed faint red when scanned. I slid it across the desk. "Scan it," I said quietly. Cole picked it up, still skeptical, and placed it on the scanner beside his keyboard. The machine beeped once. Then again, higher pitched. The screen flashed red, then switched to a command authorization display that clearly wasn't something he saw often. His expression changed like someone had poured ice water down his spine, confusion first, then recognition, then pure dread. His hand started shaking. Actually shaking. He stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Commander Swan?" His voice came out as a whisper. Everyone in the room turned to look. The teenager's phone clattered onto the floor. The young woman's mouth fell open. The man in flannel sat up straighter, suddenly at attention despite being in civilian clothes. Even the air in the room seemed different, charged with the weight of a mistake that couldn't be taken back. I stood there, still in my jeans and t-shirt, and let the moment settle. Cole's face had gone white. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Ma'am, I didn't. He couldn't finish a sentence. His eyes started to the door behind me like he was calculating whether his career could be salvaged or if it was already over. At ease, Sergeant, I said, and my voice carried the tone I used in briefings and command meetings in situations where clarity mattered more than volume. You're not in trouble. Yet? The door to the back office opened. Master Sergeant Carla Jensen appeared, drawn by the commotion or maybe by some sixth sense that her subordinate had just committed career suicide. She took in the scene, Cole frozen behind his desk, the ID still glowing red on the scanner, me standing there in civilian clothes with the posture of someone who'd spent 2 decades learning how to command a room without raising her voice. Commander Swan, Jensen said, and it wasn't a question. She'd recognized the security protocol alert on her own screen. She moved to attention immediately. Ma'am, we weren't informed of your visit. That was intentional, Master Sergeant, I said. I wanted to see how your office handles walk-ins. Unfiltered assessment. Jensen's jaw tightened. She understood immediately what had happened, what it meant, and what was about to come down from command. Sergeant Cole, step away from the desk. Cole moved like a robot, mechanical and terrified. I picked up my ID, slipped it back into my bag, and looked at the 3 recruits still frozen in their chairs. For your information, I said to them, keeping my tone conversational, the Air Force needs all kinds of people. Technical specialists, cyber operators, logistics coordinators, combat personnel, and yes, administrative professionals who keep the entire operation running. Every role matters. Every person matters. And you can't tell who someone is or what they're capable of by looking at them. I turned back to Cole. He looked like he might throw up. Next time, Sergeant, I said quietly, you might want to ask before you assume who you're talking to. I walked out of that office into the bright Colorado afternoon, got into my car, and sat there for 10 minutes before starting the engine. My hands weren't shaking, but they should have been. The drive back to base took 2 hours. I spent it thinking about every assumption I'd faced in my career, every dismissal, every moment someone looked past me or through me or decided what I was capable of before I'd opened my mouth. I'd been 19 when a training instructor told me I'd probably wash out before the end of basic because girls don't have the mentality for sustained pressure. I'd been 24 when a fellow lieutenant suggested I'd gotten my posting because the unit needed to fill a diversity quota. I'd been 31 when a colonel introduced me to a visiting dignitary as one of our female officers instead of just one of our officers, like my gender was my primary qualification. I'd swallowed every single one of those moments. Stayed professional. Kept my face neutral. Proved myself through work instead of words. Colonel Rains had taught me that. Don't fight perception with argument, he'd said. Fight it with excellence. But sitting in that car, watching the mountains fade in my rearview mirror, I wondered if silence had been strategy or surrender. I got back to base at 1800 hours. My office was in Building C, 3rd floor, corner window that looked out over the flight line. I could see aircraft taking off in the distance, their engines leaving contrails against the darkening sky. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The after-action report took me 40 minutes to write. I kept it factual, measured, stripped of emotion. I documented the time, location, the exact words used, the response protocols that should have been followed versus what actually happened. I didn't editorialize. I didn't describe how it felt. I just laid out what occurred in language that couldn't be argued with or dismissed. At the end, I added a recommendation: comprehensive review of recruiter training protocols with specific emphasis on unconscious bias and professional conduct standards. I attached a proposal outline. Then I sent it up the chain of command and closed my laptop. My quarters were a 10-minute walk from the office. The path took me past the commissary, the gym, the chapel with its non-sectarian sign glowing in the twilight. I nodded to people I passed, a captain I'd worked with on a logistics project, 2 airmen heading to night shift, a civilian contractor I recognized from the motor pool. Everyone nodded back. Some saluted. I returned each one precisely. My apartment was regulation sparse. Couch from the base exchange, coffee table I'd owned for 8 years and moved 6 times, bookshelf with technical manuals and a few novels I never seemed to have time to read. The only personal item was a framed photo on the side table, my mother at my commissioning ceremony, her hand on my shoulder, both of us smiling like we'd won something. I made coffee, sat on the couch, and waited for my phone to ring. It took 30 minutes. Major Lucas Trent from personnel. His voice was careful, diplomatic, the tone of someone who'd been handed a problem he didn't want. "Commander Swan, I've reviewed your report. And? It's thorough. Very detailed." A pause. "But I have to ask, was this incident worth formal documentation?" Sergeant Cole made an error in judgment, certainly, but from what I understand, he corrected himself immediately once he realized who you were. I set my coffee down. "The correction isn't the issue, Major. The assumption is. I understand that, but we have to consider context. You were in civilian clothes, no identification visible, no prior notification of your visit. From his perspective, a woman in her 30s couldn't possibly be military material," I said. "That's exactly the problem." Another pause. "Commander, I'm not disagreeing with you. But formal reports trigger formal investigations. That means time, resources, attention from higher command. Sergeant Cole will likely face disciplinary action, possibly reassignment. His career could be significantly impacted. Over what was essentially a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said quietly. "It was bias. And if it happened to me, it's happening to actual recruits who don't have a command ID to pull out of their bag." Trent sighed. "I'll forward your report. But I want you to understand, this is going to create waves. Some people will see this as making an example out of a young NCO who made an honest mistake. They'll say you're being vindictive. Then they'll say that," I said. "Forward the report, Major." He did. By morning, it had reached the desk of my direct superior, Colonel Patricia Vance, who called me into her office at 0900 hours. Vance was 52, a career officer who'd flown combat missions in 2 different conflicts and now ran administrative oversight for the entire region. She had 0 patience for politics and even less for what she called personality conflicts masquerading as policy issues. "Sit," she said, not looking up from her screen. I sat. She finished reading, then turned to face me. "You want to audit recruiter training nationwide?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you understand what that entails? The bureaucracy, the pushback, the accusations that you're wasting time and money on a problem that most people don't think exists." "Yes, ma'am." She studied me for a long moment. "Why no? You've been in service for 16 years. You've faced worse than some E5 with poor judgment. Why is this the hill you're choosing?" I thought about that teenager in the hoodie, smirking. The college student with her backpack, watching. The man in flannel, embarrassed. "Because they were watching," I said. 3 potential recruits saw a staff sergeant dismiss someone based on appearance alone. What did that teach them about who the military values? What did it teach them about who belongs? Vance nodded slowly. "You know this will cost you political capital you might need later." "Yes, ma'am." "You know you'll make enemies. People who think you're being oversensitive or pushing an agenda." "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She turned back to her screen. "Because I'm approving it. You'll have authorization to conduct spot checks at recruitment offices across 6 states. 60 days. You'll submit preliminary findings at the 45-day mark. And Commander," she looked at me again, "make sure this is about standards, not revenge. We fix systems, not people." "Understood, ma'am." I left her office and went straight to work. Within 3 days, I'd designed an assessment protocol. Random visits, civilian clothes, no advance warning. I'd observe intake procedures, document interaction patterns, identify training gaps. I'd interview recruits, review rejection rates, cross-reference demographics with stated qualification requirements. It wasn't glamorous work. Most of it was paperwork, data analysis, hour-long drives to offices in towns I'd never heard of. But every office I visited showed variations of the same patterns. Younger male applicants were asked about their athletic background and leadership potential. Women were asked if they'd considered nursing or administrative tracks. Applicants with accents faced questions about citizenship status before anyone checked their documentation. Older candidates were steered toward reserve programs before anyone assessed their actual qualifications. Not everywhere. Not everyone. But enough. Consistently enough that it wasn't isolated incidents. It was cultural. I documented everything. I didn't editorialize. I just collected evidence and built a case that couldn't be dismissed as personal grievance or oversensitivity. 6 weeks in, I received a letter from Colonel Rains. He'd retired the previous year but still kept track of people he'd mentored. He didn't use email, said it made people lazy in their thinking. His letters were always handwritten, precise, thoughtful. This one said, "Command doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it's the way you stand when everyone else sits down. You're doing the right thing. Don't apologize for it." I kept that letter in my desk drawer and read it every time someone suggested I was overreacting. There were plenty of those suggestions. At a briefing in week 7, a lieutenant commander from Navy Liaison asked if I really thought unconscious bias training would change anything. "People are who they are," he said. "You can't regulate respect." No, I agreed. But you can regulate professional standards. And you can create consequences for not meeting them. An Army major I'd never met before sent me an email calling my audit a witch hunt looking for problems that don't exist. I wrote back, "Then the data will show that, and we'll all sleep better." It didn't show that. By day 59, I had evidence of systematic bias across 4 of the 6 states I'd surveyed. The patterns were clear, consistent, and completely fixable through updated training protocols and improved oversight. I submitted my preliminary findings with specific recommendations: mandatory bias training for all recruiters, standardized assessment procedures, anonymous feedback systems for applicants, and regular spot-check audits to ensure compliance. The report went to Colonel Vance, who forwarded it to the General Staff, who sat on it for 3 weeks without comment. Then I got passed over for promotion. It wasn't announced formally. I just didn't make the O6 list that year. No explanation, no feedback, just an absence where my name should have been. I'd been eligible for colonel for 2 years, well within normal promotion windows. My record was spotless. My performance reviews were exemplary. But the list came out, and I wasn't on it. Colonel Rains called me that night. I heard. "It's fine," I said. "It's not fine. It's retaliation." They didn't say that. They don't have to say it. They just have to do it. He was quiet for a moment. "You still did the right thing. Doesn't feel like it tonight." "That's how you know it was right," he said. "The easy things never cost you anything." I hung up and sat in my apartment, staring at nothing. I thought about quitting. Genuinely thought about it for the first time in 16 years. I could walk away, find a civilian job, stop fighting battles that nobody seemed to want one. I was 39 years old. I could start over. Other people did it. But the next morning, I showed up at 0600 hours like always. I ran my 5 miles like always. I answered emails, attended briefings, reviewed logistics reports. I did my job like always. And 3 weeks later, something shifted. The General Staff released new command guidance on recruitment procedures. They didn't credit my report specifically, but every recommendation I'd made was in there. Mandatory bias training. Standardized assessment protocols. Anonymous feedback systems. Regular audits. The language was bureaucratic and careful, framed as continuous improvement initiatives rather than corrections to identified problems. But the substance was there. Within 2 months, the changes rolled out across all Air Force recruitment offices nationwide. Nobody apologized. Nobody acknowledged that there had been a problem or that I'd been right to identify it. The system just quietly adjusted itself, the way large organizations do when they can't afford to admit error, but can't afford to continue the error either. I didn't get promoted that year, but I got something else. I started getting emails from junior officers, mostly women, some men, thanking me. They'd heard about the audit through informal channels, the way information spreads in the military despite official silence. They told me stories about their own recruitment experiences, their own moments of being dismissed or underestimated or steered away from roles they were qualified for. One email came from a second lieutenant named Megan Ortiz. She'd been that college student with the backpack in the Colorado Springs office. She wrote, "I almost walked out that day. I almost decided the Air Force wasn't for me. But then you showed him your ID, and I realized people like you are already in here. Fighting. Staying. Making space. So I stayed too. I commissioned 3 months ago. Thank you." I printed that email and kept it in the same drawer as Colonel Rain's letter. Slowly, carefully, without spotlight or stage, I started building something different. I began mentoring junior officers who reached out. I created informal networks, connected people across bases, shared resources and advice. When I saw bias in action, I addressed it immediately, not with anger, but with questions that forced people to examine their own assumptions. I learned that restraint was a weapon. That change didn't always need a stage or spotlight. That influence could run deeper than title. I also learned that I was tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. The kind that comes from fighting the same battle in different rooms for 16 years. But tired wasn't the same as defeated. I could be both things at once. And I kept showing up. A year later, I walked into that same recruitment office in Colorado Springs. This time I wore my uniform, Lieutenant Colonel, 05, ribbons and badges, and every visible marker of rank and authority. Master Sergeant Jensen was still there, now serving as the office chief. She stood when I entered, came to attention sharply. "Commander Swan." "Welcome back, ma'am." The office looked different. New posters on the walls emphasizing diversity of roles. Updated literature showing a broader range of people in uniform. A feedback box mounted near the door where applicants could submit anonymous comments. And behind the desk, Technical Sergeant Ryan Cole. E6 now. He'd been promoted since the last time I'd seen him, transferred to this office after completing remedial leadership training and an additional assignment in Germany. He stood immediately when he saw me, came to attention with precision that looked practiced, but not panicked. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was steady. "Sergeant Cole." I approached the desk. "How's recruitment going?" "Good, ma'am. We've had strong numbers this quarter across all specialties." He hesitated, then added, "We've also implemented the new assessment protocols. They've been effective." I glanced at the materials on his desk, the updated forms and procedures. "What's been the biggest adjustment?" He thought about that, asking more questions up front, not making assumptions based on initial presentation, taking time to understand what each person brings before categorizing them. He met my eyes. "It makes the job harder, but it makes the results better." "Good answer," I said. He nodded, then took a breath like he was about to step off a cliff. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Not just for that day, though I absolutely apologize for that day, but for what I represented. The kind of thinking I brought to this role before I knew better." "And now you know better?" "Yes, ma'am." "I hope so, ma'am." I studied him. His posture was different than it had been a year ago. Less confidence, more competence. The difference mattered. What changed? I got sent to Germany. Worked under a commander who didn't tolerate lazy assessment. She made me document every decision, justify every judgment. Broke down my assumptions piece by piece. He paused. "She told me about you. About what happened here. She said you could have ended my career, but you chose to fix the system instead. That you gave me a chance to learn." "She told you that?" "Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Colonel Harris. She said she knew you from academy days, that you'd always been someone who built people up instead of tearing them down." He straightened. "So I'm trying to be worth that chance, ma'am." I nodded once. "Then pass it forward, Sergeant. When you see someone else making the mistakes you made, help them learn. That's how the system gets better." "Yes, ma'am." I left the office and stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking back at the building. Jensen came out a minute later. "He's a good recruiter now," she said. "Completely different person than he was." "Good. But you were right to document it. We needed that way-up call." She hesitated. "For what it's worth, ma'am, a lot of us appreciated what you did. Even if we couldn't say so at the time. You're saying so now. That's what matters." She saluted. I returned it. We stood there for a moment in shared understanding of everything that hadn't needed to be said. Then I got in my car and drove back to base, where a stack of work waited on my desk and a briefing needed my review and 37 emails required responses. Normal day. Normal life. The kind of ordinary that I'd fought for the right to have. 3 years later, I made Colonel. Oh, 6. The promotion ceremony was small, just the essential personnel and a few people I'd invited personally. My mother flew out from Colorado, looking older than I remembered, but still steady. Colonel Rains came out of retirement to pin my eagles on. Colonel Vance read the orders. I was 42 years old. I'd been in service for 20 years. I'd deployed 6 times, commanded 5 units, mentored 43 officers through their early careers. I'd fought battles nobody noticed and won victories that nobody celebrated. I'd been dismissed, underestimated, passed over, and forgotten more times than I could count. And I was still here. The promotion ceremony finished, people shook my hand, someone took photos. Then I went in my new office, larger than my old one, different building, same view of the flight line, and started work on my new assignment. I'd been given command of the Recruiting and Training Standards Division for the entire Western region. My job was to ensure that every person who walked into a recruitment office received professional, unbiased assessment. That the systems I'd spent 3 years trying to fix would stay fixed. The irony wasn't lost on me. My first week, I reviewed incident reports from the past year. Most showed improvement. Some showed old patterns creeping back. Human nature and institutional momentum, always in tension. I flagged the problem areas and scheduled site visits. I also created a new program, joint training sessions where experienced recruiters worked alongside new ones, with senior officers observing. Practical application of standards in real time, with immediate feedback. It took resources and coordination and buy-in from multiple command levels. But it worked. The complaints came anyway. This is overkill, one major told me during a quarterly review. We're spending too much time on sensitivity issues instead of actual readiness. Professional conduct is readiness, I said. A recruiter who can't assess candidates fairly creates operational gaps we'll pay for later. But you're treating every incident like a crisis. I'm treating every incident like what it is, a data point that tells us whether our systems work. I closed my report and looked at him. Would you rather find out the systems don't work now or 5 years from now when we're wondering why retention is down and morale is failing? He didn't have an answer for that. The work was constant, grinding, unglamorous. For every victory, there were 3 setbacks. For every improved office, there was one falling back into old habits. But slowly, incrementally, measurably, things got better. I started getting different emails. Not just from officers thanking me, but from recruits who'd had positive experiences. From parents whose kids had been treated with respect and given fair assessment. From retired officers who said the culture felt different than when they'd served. I kept every single one. Built a folder on my computer labeled "Why This Matters" and read through it whenever I questioned whether any of this was worth the cost. My mother asked me once, during one of her rare visits, if I regretted choosing this life. We were sitting in my quarters, drinking coffee, watching the sun set over the flight line. Sometimes, I admitted, when I'm at another wedding alone, or when I realize I don't have any friends outside the military, or when I think about what a normal life might have looked like. But then I think about Sergeant Cole. About how he's probably training someone right now, passing forward what he learned. About all the recruits who'll get fair assessment because the system is a little bit better than it was. About the junior officers who email me saying they're staying in because they see people like me fighting to make this place what it says it is. I shrugged. Maybe that's enough. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Your father left because he said I cared more about you than him. He was right. I did. And you care more about this than anything else. That's not a flaw, baby. That's purpose. I held onto her hand and didn't say anything. Sometimes there wasn't anything to say. 5 years after the incident in Colorado Springs, I was invited to speak at the Air Force Academy's commissioning ceremony. They wanted someone to address the graduating class about leadership and service, someone whose career demonstrated both. I didn't want to do it. Public speaking had never been my strength, but Colonel Rains called and said, "You owe them your experience. Don't be selfish with your scars. So I went. I stood on the stage in front of 800 cadets in their dress uniforms, their families packed into the stands, the Colorado sky impossibly blue overhead. I'd written a speech, but standing there, looking at all those young faces, I set my notes aside. I joined the Air Force because I wanted to fly, I said. Not literally, I get airsick, but I wanted to be part of something that lifted off the ground. Something bigger than the small town I came from, bigger than the limitations I'd been handed. What I didn't know then was that flying meant turbulence. That being part of something bigger meant constantly justifying your place in it. That wearing the uniform didn't protect you from being seen as less than by people who should have known better. I've been dismissed, underestimated, and categorized as not what we need more times than I can count. Sometimes by people who outranked me. Sometimes by people I outranked. Sometimes by systems that weren't designed with people like me in mind. But here's what I learned. The uniform doesn't make you equal. Your work does. Your consistency does. Your refusal to accept less than the standards we claim to uphold, that's what makes you equal. And sometimes, that's what makes you better. You're about to commission as second lieutenants. Oh, 1. The bottom of the officer chain. Some of you will face assumptions about what you can handle based on your gender, your background, your appearance. Some of you will be given opportunities you didn't earn because someone wants to fill a quota. Both of those things are problems. Both of them come from the same broken thinking that who you are matters more than what you do. Your job is to prove, every single day, that what you do is all that matters. Document your work. Exceed every standard. Take the assignments nobody wants and make them succeed. Build systems that outlast your assignment. Mentor the people coming up behind you. And when you see someone being judged on anything other than their competence, fix it. Immediately. Not with anger, but with clarity. Power isn't in the badge. It's in the choice not to misuse it. Remember that when you pin on your bars. Remember it when you make rank. Remember it when you're the one sitting behind the desk, deciding who gets a chance and who gets dismissed. The Air Force needs all of you. Not in spite of your differences, but because of them. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And don't let anyone reduce you to a category when you've worked to be a person. Now go earn those commissions. And then go earn them again tomorrow. And the day after that. Because that's the job. That's service. That's what we signed up for. I stepped away from the microphone to silence. Then one person started clapping, my mother, standing in the third row, tears on her face. Then Colonel Rains, standing beside her. Then the entire graduating class rose to their feet, applause building like thunder. I stood there and let it wash over me, this moment that felt both too much and exactly right. Afterward, cadets lined up to talk to me. A young woman with her hair in a tight bun said, "I heard about what happened in Colorado Springs. It's like a legend at the academy now. The commander in jeans." "It wasn't legend," I said. "It was just Tuesday." "That's what makes it matter," she said. "That it was normal. That it could happen to anyone. That you didn't let it slide." Another cadet, male, asked, "Did you really almost quit after you got passed over for promotion?" "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because quitting would have meant they were right about me." And they weren't. He nodded like that answered something for him. I spent 2 hours talking to cadets, answering questions, listening to their concerns about the career they were about to start. They were so young. 22, 23, full of certainty and doubt in equal measure. I remembered being that young, remembered thinking I understood what I was getting into. I didn't tell them it would be harder than they thought. They'd figure that out soon enough. Instead, I told them, find someone like Colonel Rains. Someone who pushes you because they believe in you, not because they want to break you. Listen to them. And then be that person for someone else. The sun was setting by the time I left the academy. I drove back to my base, 3 hours north, windows down, radio off, just the sound of wind and road. I thought about that girl in Colorado who'd spent weekends at the airfield, dreaming about purpose. I thought about all the versions of myself between then and now, the lieutenant who worked 18-hour days to prove herself, the captain who took command of failing units, the major who deployed when everyone else had families to go home to, the lieutenant colonel who walked into a recruitment office and refused to accept dismissal. I thought about the colonel I was now, still fighting the same battles, just from a different position. The fight never ended. That was the thing nobody told you. You didn't win once and get to rest. You won small victories that bought time until the next fight. You fixed systems that broke down and needed fixing again. You trained people who were tired and got replaced by people who needed training. It was endless, exhausting, necessary work. And I was good at it. 2 years later, I was sitting in my office reviewing a stack of recruiter evaluations when my assistant, Tasha Bell, knocked on my door. "Ma'am, there's someone here to see you. Says she doesn't have an appointment but hopes you'll make time." "Who is it?" "Second Lieutenant Megan Ortiz." I remembered the name before I remembered the face, the college student with the backpack, the email thanking me, the young officer who'd stayed because I'd shown her someone like her could make it. "Send her in." She walked in wearing her uniform, confident but not cocky, and saluted sharply. I returned it and gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Lieutenant, what can I do for you?" "I'm being assigned to recruitment training, ma'am. I start next month." "I wanted to ask," she hesitated. "I wanted to ask what you'd tell someone starting that job. What matters most?" I leaned back in my chair, studying her. She'd grown into her rank, that much was clear. The uncertainty I'd seen in that waiting room 4 years ago had been replaced with purpose. "Respect every person who walks through that door," I said. "Not because of what they might become, but because of what they already are, someone who chose to show up. That choice matters. Honor it. Even if they don't seem like military material? Especially then. Because you don't know their story. You don't know what they've overcome to walk through that door. You don't know what they're capable of until you give them the chance to show you." I paused. I walked into a recruitment office once in civilian clothes. The recruiter took one look at me and decided I wasn't worth his time. He was wrong. "Don't be that recruiter." She smiled slightly. "I know that story, ma'am. Everyone in my training class knows that story." "Good. Then learn from it. But also know that recruiter learned too. He's a technical sergeant now, running his own office, training new recruiters. He makes mistakes still. We all do. But he tries. He listens. He treats people with respect even when he doesn't understand them. That's all I'm asking. Try. Listen. Respect." "Yes, ma'am." She stood, then hesitated again. "Can I say something personal?" "Go ahead." I was going to quit that day. Walk out of that office and never think about the Air Force again. But you showed me something I needed to see, that the system isn't just the people who dismiss you. It's also the people who fight back. The people who stay. The people who make space. She took a breath. "So I stayed. And I'm glad I did. Thank you." I nodded once, throat tight. "Thank you for telling me. Now go be that person for someone else." She saluted again and left. I sat at my desk for a while after, staring at nothing, thinking about chain reactions and small moments that compound into something larger. My phone buzzed. Text from Colonel Rains. "Heard you spoke at the academy. Heard it was good. Proud of you, Commander. Keep flying." I texted back, "Always." The years continued. I made it to 47, then 48, then 49. The uniform got a few more ribbons, a few more markers of time and service. My mother got older, slower, until she couldn't travel anymore, and I had to schedule leave to visit her. Colonel Rains had a heart attack, recovered, retired fully this time. The friends I'd made early in my career moved on, some retired, some transferred to different branches, some left the military entirely for civilian life. I stayed. Not because I didn't have options. By my late 40s with my rank and experience, I had plenty of options. Defense contractors called regularly, offering six-figure salaries for consulting work. Universities reached out about teaching positions. Government agencies wanted people with my background for administrative roles. I stayed because the work wasn't finished. The systems I'd helped build needed maintenance. The culture shifts I'd pushed for needed reinforcement. The junior officers I'd mentored needed someone who understood what they were facing. And new problems kept emerging, technology changing faster than training could keep up, budget cuts affecting retention, political pressures creating instability in command structures. There was always another problem. Always another battle. Always another reason to stay one more year. I was 51 when I got the call about the new assignment. Director of Personnel Standards for the entire Air Force. 6, Washington, D.C. Direct impact on policy and implementation across every base, every unit, every recruitment office in the service. It was the position I'd been working toward without realizing it. Everything I'd done, the audit, the training programs, the quiet advocacy, the system building, had been preparation for this. I took the job. Moving to DC felt like moving to a different planet. The pace was different, the culture was different, the battles were fought in conference rooms instead of on bases. But the core mission remained the same: ensure that the Air Force treated people fairly, assessed them accurately, and built systems that rewarded competence over comfort. I spent my first year in the position reviewing personnel policies across the service. Promotion boards, assignment protocols, evaluation standards, discrimination complaint procedures. I found gaps everywhere, not because people were malicious, but because systems were built by humans and humans have blind spots. I fixed what I could, documented what I couldn't, built coalitions with other officers who saw the same problems, pushed policy changes through bureaucratic channels that moved like molasses, lost more battles than I won. Won enough to justify staying. My mother died when I was 53. Heart failure, sudden, while I was in a meeting I couldn't leave. I got the call from the hospital 2 hours after she'd passed. I flew to Colorado that night, arranged the funeral, cleaned out her apartment, and discovered she'd kept every letter I'd sent her over 30 years. Boxes of them, organized by year, tied with string. I took them back to DC and read through them over the course of a month. Letters from my 20s, full of certainty and ambition. Letters from my 30s, more measured, more aware of complexity. Letters from my 40s, shorter, more focused on specific problems and solutions. A chronicle of how service had shaped me, page by page, year by year. At the funeral, her pastor asked if I wanted to speak. I stood at the podium and said, my mother worked 2 jobs so I could have choices. I chose this uniform. I chose service. I chose a life she didn't fully understand, but always supported. She used to ask when I'd come home. I never had a good answer because this was home, the bases, the briefings, the constant moving. But she was home too. The one constant. And I didn't visit enough. I didn't call enough. I chose the mission over her more times than I can count. That's the cost of service. Not just what you give up, but who you give up. I hope she knew I loved her even when I wasn't there. I hope that was enough. I sat down and didn't cry until later, alone in my hotel room, staring at boxes of letters that represented a relationship built in fragments across 3 decades. The next morning I flew back to DC and went to work. Because that's what you do. You carry the grief and do the job. You don't get to stop because life happens. Service doesn't pause for personal loss. I was 55 when I walked into a recruitment office in Virginia, unannounced, wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater, hair down, no visible rank. The office was busy, processing applications from a community college group that had come in together. I sat in the waiting area and watched. A young recruiter, maybe 24, worked through the applications methodically. She asked questions, listened to answers, treated every applicant with the same professional courtesy, regardless of their appearance or background. She was patient with the nervous ones, encouraging to the uncertain ones, honest about requirements and opportunities. She was good. Exactly what a recruiter should be. After an hour, I approached her desk. "Excuse me, do you have a moment?" She looked up, smiled professionally. "Of course, ma'am. Are you interested in information about service opportunities?" "Actually, I work in personnel standards. I've been observing your intake process." Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, did I do something wrong?" "No," I said. "You did everything right. I wanted to tell you that. Whatever training you received, whatever mentor taught you to treat people with that level of respect, they did their job well. And so did you." She relaxed. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot." She pulled out a folder from her desk. "We got new training materials about 2 years ago. Respect-based recruitment protocols. It changed how I think about this job. Made me realize every person who walks in here is making a brave choice just by showing up." I smiled. Those were my protocols. My language. My years of work distilled into training materials that were now standard across the service. I'm glad they're useful. Very useful. The trainer who ran our session said they were developed by someone who'd experienced bias firsthand and decided to fix the system instead of just complaining about it. Said that's what real leadership looks like. Sounds like a good trainer. She was. Lieutenant Colonel Harris. She told us a story about a commander who walked into a recruitment office in civilian clothes and got dismissed by a recruiter who didn't know who he was talking to. She said that commander could have destroyed that recruiter's career, but chose to fix the problem instead. It's kind of a legend in recruitment training now. I nodded slowly. What do you think about that story? She thought about it. I think it takes more strength to fix a system than to punish a person. And I think that commander understood something important, that the recruiter was just a symptom. The real problem was deeper. That's exactly right, I said quietly. She smiled again. Are you really from Personnel Standards? I pulled out my ID, still matte black, still triggering the same security protocols. She scanned it, and her eyes went wide when the screen lit up red. Colonel Swan, she whispered. At ease, I said immediately. You're not in trouble. I told you, you did everything right. I just wanted to see the protocols in action. And to meet someone who's carrying forward work that matters to me. She stood, came to attention despite my instruction to relax. Ma'am, it's an honor. Truly. The work you've done, it's made this job better. Made the whole system better. Thank you, Airman. But the work isn't mine anymore. It's yours. Every time you treat someone with respect, every time you assess fairly, every time you see potential instead of limitation, you're doing the work. Keep doing it. Yes, ma'am. I left that office and stood in the parking lot, watching recruits come and go. Young people with their whole lives ahead of them, choosing service, choosing something bigger than themselves. Some would stay for a career like I had. Some would serve their contract and move on. All of them deserved to be seen, assessed fairly, given a real chance. The work had taken 33 years. It had cost me relationships, promotions, certainty, normalcy. It had cost me my 20s, my 30s, my 40s. It had given me purpose, impact, meaning. A fair trade, maybe. Or maybe I was just too deep in to see it any other way. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. Colonel Swan. Ma'am, this is Technical Sergeant Ryan Cole. I was the recruiter in Colorado Springs. 10 years ago. I remembered. Of course I remembered. Sergeant Cole. How can I help you? I'm retiring, ma'am. 20 years, E6, honorable discharge. And I wanted to call you before I did. To say thank you. You didn't have to give me a second chance. You could have ended my career that day and you would have been right to. But you didn't. You fixed the system and let me be part of the solution. That changed my life. Changed how I see the world. Changed how I treat people. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know your choice mattered. I closed my eyes, leaned against my car. I appreciate you calling, Sergeant. But you did the hard part. You learned. You changed. You passed it forward. That was your choice. Be proud of it. I am, ma'am. And I'm proud to have served in the same Air Force as you. We said goodbye. I sat in my car for a long time after, staring at the recruitment office, thinking about chain reactions and compound effects and choices that ripple outward in ways you never see. I was 57 when I stood in a different recruitment office, this time in uniform, this time announced, this time as the Director of Personnel Standards conducting an official site review. The office was in Texas, part of a new pilot program that integrated recruitment with community outreach. The staff came to attention when I entered. I told them to relax, to continue their normal operations. I spent the day observing, asking questions, reviewing processes. Everything I saw met or exceeded standards. The office chief, a master sergeant with 15 years in recruitment, walked me through their retention metrics, their demographic data, their applicant satisfaction surveys. We're proud of what we've built here, ma'am, she said. It's based on the respect protocols you developed. They've become the foundation of how we approach recruitment. I'm glad they're working, I said. But protocols only matter if people believe in them. That belief comes from leadership. You're the reason this office succeeds. She nodded, then hesitated. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Was it worth it? The fight to change these systems? The years of pushing against resistance? The cost to your career? I thought about that question. Really thought about it. About my mother's funeral, about promotions I didn't get, about relationships I never built, about the normal life I'd traded for this one. Ask me again in 10 years, I said. When the next generation is running these offices. When the protocols I helped build are just how things are done, not some new initiative. When nobody remembers why we needed to change because the old ways seem absurd. Ask me then, and I'll tell you if it was worth it. She smiled. I think you already know the answer, ma'am. Maybe I did. As I was leaving, a young woman in civilian clothes entered the office. Early 20s, nervous energy, eyes darting around like she wasn't sure she belonged. She approached the desk hesitantly, and the recruiter on duty looked up and smiled. Good afternoon, he said warmly. Welcome. How can I help you today? The young woman relaxed slightly. I'm interested in joining. I'm not sure what I qualify for, but I wanted to learn about my options. Absolutely. Let's start with your background and interests, and we'll figure out what might be a good fit. He pulled out the standard assessment form. First things first, what makes you interested in serving? I stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. This conversation that was happening because systems had changed. Because enough people had fought for those changes. Because small victories had compounded into cultural shifts. I turned and left, walking to my car in the Texas heat, thinking about that girl from Colorado who dreamed about aircraft and purpose and something bigger than the limitations she'd been handed. She'd made it. Not despite the system, not around the system, but through the system, by fixing it, piece by piece, year by year, policy by policy. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because it was all I had, and it was everything I'd chosen. I got in my car and drove back to the airport, back to DC, back to the next problem that needed solving. Because the work never ended. But neither did the purpose. And that, after 33 years and counting, still felt like flying. I retired at 59. Not because I wanted to, but because my body made the choice for me. The decades of stress, the deployment cycles, the 18-hour days, they accumulated into chronic pain that no amount of physical therapy could fully resolve. My doctor gave me the look that said I could keep pushing and pay for it later, or I could stop now and have a few good years left. I chose to stop. The retirement ceremony was held at the Pentagon, a formality I would have skipped if they'd let me. But they didn't let me. Too many years, too much rank, too much symbolic weight. So I stood there in my dress uniform one last time while a 3-star general read my service record aloud, deployments, commands, commendations, the sanitized version of 37 years distilled into 5 minutes of official language. What he didn't say, the nights I'd cried in empty quarters, questioning everything. The relationships that withered because I was never present. The moments of doubt when I wondered if any of it mattered. The cost of choosing mission over everything else, every single time. What he did say, Colonel Evelyn Swan's legacy will endure in the systems she built, the standards she elevated, and the culture she helped transform. The Air Force is better because she served. I hoped that was true. Some days I believed it. Other days I wasn't sure. After the ceremony, people lined up to shake my hand. Junior officers I'd mentored. Senior officers I'd worked with. Civilians from oversight committees. They all said versions of the same thing. Thank you, congratulations, you'll be missed. I smiled and nodded and tried to feel whatever I was supposed to feel in that moment. Ryan Cole was there. He'd come out of retirement himself, driven from Texas with his wife and 2 kids. He waited until everyone else had finished, then approached with his family. Colonel Swan, he said, I wanted you to meet my family. This is my wife, Maria. And these are my daughters, Emily and Sarah. I shook hands with Maria, then knelt down to the girls' level. They were maybe 8 and 10, dressed in their Sunday best, eyes wide at all the uniforms. Your dad tells me he learned a lot in the Air Force, I said to them. He talks about you sometimes, the older one, Emily said. He says you taught him that everyone deserves respect. Your dad taught himself that, I said. I just gave him the chance. Ryan's eyes were wet. I wouldn't be the father I am, the man I am, if you hadn't shown me a better way. I wanted my girls to meet you, to see what real leadership looks like. I stood, throat tight, raised them to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, to see people instead of categories. That's the leadership that matters. Yes, ma'am. They left, and I was alone with my thoughts in a conference room full of empty chairs and leftover cake. Colonel Rains found me there 20 minutes later. He was 74 now, walking with a cane, but his eyes were still sharp. You hiding? He asked. Thinking. About? Whether I did enough. He sat down beside me, slowly, carefully. You fixed systems that were broken. You trained officers who are training others. You changed a culture that needed changing. What more could you have done? I don't know. Maybe that's the problem. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I told you once that command is the way you stand when everyone else sits down. You've been standing for 37 years. It's okay to sit now. I don't know how. You'll learn. Same way you learned everything else, badly at first, then better. I laughed to spite myself. That's terrible advice. It's honest advice. He stood, braced himself on the cane. You did good, Evelyn. Better than good. Let that be enough. He left. I sat there until the maintenance crew came to clean up, then I walked out of the Pentagon for the last time. No uniform tomorrow. No morning briefing. No stack of problems waiting for solutions. Just silence and space and the terrifying freedom of time that belonged to me. I moved back to Colorado, to the town I'd left at 18. My mother's house had sold years ago, but I bought a small place on the edge of town with a view of the mountains. The airfield was still there, smaller now, mostly used for private planes and flight training. I went there on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after retirement, not sure what I was looking for. Maybe just evidence that the beginning had been real, that the girl who'd handed tools to volunteers and dreamed about purpose had actually existed. An older man was working on a Cessna in the hangar. He looked up when I approached, studied my face, then broke into a smile. Evelyn? Evelyn Turner. It took me a moment. Turner was my mother's maiden name, what I'd gone by before I commissioned and chose Swan for service. Mr. Hendricks? Haven't been called that in years. Everyone just calls me Hank now. He wiped his hands on a rag. Heard you retired from the Air Force. Colonel, right? That's right. Your mother used to talk about you. Every time she came by. My daughter's serving, she'd say. She's making a difference. She was proud. The words hit harder than expected. I wish I'd come home more. She understood. That's what she always said, she's doing important work. I can't ask her to choose between that and me. He paused. But between you and me? I think she wanted you to choose her sometimes. Just sometimes. I nodded, unable to speak. You here to fly? He asked. We've got a trainer if you want to take her up. I get airsick. He laughed. You spent 37 years in the Air Force and you get airsick? I spent 37 years in the Air Force because I believed in what flying meant. Not because I could do it myself. He considered that. That might be the most Air Force thing I've ever heard. I helped him work on the Cessna for an hour, handing him tools like I'd done when I was 14. The work was simple, repetitive, requiring no decisions of consequence. It felt strange and peaceful in equal measure. When I left, he called after me. You planning to stick around? For a while, I said. Maybe longer. Good. Come back anytime. Always need help around here. I drove home as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible. I thought about the girl I'd been, the woman I'd become, the space between them filled with choices and costs and consequences. That night, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a report, not a policy brief, just words about what I'd learned. About systems and people. About how change happens slowly and requires more patience than passion. About the difference between revenge and justice, between anger and clarity. I wrote, power isn't in the badge. It's in the choice not to misuse it. And service isn't about sacrifice, it's about deciding what matters enough to build your life around. I built mine around the belief that systems could be better, that fairness wasn't weakness, that everyone deserved to be seen. Was it worth it? Yes. Would I do it again? Yes. Do I wish it had cost less? Every single day. But I'm here. I made it through. And somewhere, someone is walking into a recruitment office right now and being treated with respect because enough people fought for that to be normal. That's not glory. That's not recognition. But it's real. And it matters. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it has to be. I closed the laptop and looked out the window at the mountains I'd left behind and returned to. Tomorrow, I'd wake up without a mission. Without rank. Without the structure that had defined me for 37 years. I'd figure it out. Same way I'd figured out everything else, badly at first, then better. And that felt, surprisingly, like flying. If this hit home, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder, respect isn't optional. New chapters drop weekly. Questions for you. Have you ever been dismissed on site? What changed when you spoke up? If you were in that office, what would you have said to the recruiter? Where do you see subtle bias show up most? Hiring, school, family, or elsewhere? What boundary have you set recently that protected your dignity? For veterans/service members, what's one fix you'd make to recruiting culture? Would you have filed the report or handled it off the record? Why? Drop your answers below and tell me where you're tuning in from.